that track. And time now is 20 minutes away from 9 this morning.
Basically, this generation is more liberal, more tolerant, more Democrat-leaning than the one before. It's not just because they're young.
For another point of view, it's Hard News with Russell Brown and Wammo on Kiwi.
Yes, you'll find them hanging out at publicaddress.net, the Hard News blog, and also on the telly as well, the Media 7 show on TVNZ7. Russell Brown joining us this morning. Morning, Russell.
Good morning.
ACC, first of all, it's been a week since the news broke about some of the changes that are proposed, and it looks like it might just squeeze through now.
Yes, with the help of the Maori Party, which has changed its mind for reasons that aren't entirely clear.
Now, I find it a little bit bizarre because the Maori Party often represents people on the lower socio-economic side of things, and one of the proposed changes that they might be pushing through is that when you have an accident, you might have to pay some of the costs, either $50 to $100.
Yeah, which is like it's a regressive tax basically.
Yeah,
it's a flat tax that'll hurt lower income earners much more than wealthy people.
So it would hurt their constituency.
Yeah,
and yet they're voting for it.
Yeah, although Tariana Turia's got some fairly convoluted argument saying that perhaps in the end we could work this so it's better for Maori. I actually think that they've got to stop saying this. Saying that every dubious decision they make is made because we can see that it might be better for Maori. Because if you think back to last year's campaign, they pitched themselves as the party for all New Zealanders, and they are there to represent Maori interests. That's in the constitution of the party, but they really need to stop saying that. Basically screw everyone else. Because
let's be honest, they were given some concessions initially around the election, and now they're starting to get shafted, right?
They are. But it's not entirely the National Party's fault for that. I just think they've been naive and haven't played things well.
Yeah.
Whatever you think of Rodney Hyman Act, they know how, when, and where to exercise leverage.
Yeah. They do, indeed.
Rodney Hyde gets what he wants. He's been there long enough to know what to do, and he gets what he wants. And that's what we're not seeing from the Maori Party. They keep getting steamrolled.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting, although the Maori Party coming in to support this means that ACT won't get its way on opening up part of the system to competition, which is seen, I think, with some justification as the road to privatisation. The interesting thing is that who came out against this yesterday is the Employers and Manufacturers Association, who've generally been very much on the National Party's side.
And what's their reasoning here?
They don't think it would actually benefit their members. They think that there would be a short period of lost leading premiums, and then they'd cop it in 2 or 3 years' time because the private insurers would look to recoup what they'd lost with the lost leading premiums, which is actually quite an extraordinary thing for them to say.
Indeed. Do you think we learnt anything from a great article earlier on the week in the Herald? I think it's Woodhouse, who was the godfather of the ACC scheme in the 70s, and he spoke out against these changes. And there's nothing like getting the perspective of someone who was there from the beginning. Did you see that article?
I did see that article, yeah. He was quite fired up, wasn't he?
Did we learn anything there?
I think so. Well, the thing to learn is that a lot of what's been presented as there is no alternative, it's a fait accompli, we have no choice, is actually the consequence of, at least in some cases, some fairly arbitrary decisions about how you do your accounting. And we haven't really had the discussion about whether that's the right thing to do, the fully funding thing. National have already pushed back the fully funding date, which was a sensible thing to do. And more sensible, say, than stopping contributing to the National Superannuation Fund, which I think was short-sighted. But with this one, I think they've swallowed whatever principle might have been at stake there. Because if we had stuck with the original deadline for full funding of all claims, things would have been a bit nastier. But actually, I'll tell you what is really good is the editorial in the Listener this week, which is not something you can always say.
No, what does that say?
It basically goes through in a very knowledgeable way. I suspect that someone like Rebecca McPhee's written it. She's a business journalist. on all the assumptions that have led to this perception of crisis. And a lot of them aren't set in stone. A lot of them are basically accounting assumptions. And the case hasn't, necessarily been made for doing things that way. It is really worth reading. It's fascinating, actually.
Okay. Pick up the latest copy of The Listener.
Indeed.
Now, the other issue this morning, MMP, the referendum, looks like it's going to happen in 2011, another one in 2014. Audrey Young this morning in the Herald says this is her opening lines, voters will have to vote twice in separate referendums to get rid of MMP, the electoral system we currently have.
Yes, extraordinary. What a strange way of putting it.
To get rid of.
Yes, or perhaps it might have been that opening paragraph might have read a bit better if she said voters would have to vote twice if they wanted to.
If they wanted
voters
to change.
Voters will have. I mean, there's a massive assumption there that voters want to and that would be a good thing. It's very oddly phrased. I mean, I'm quite surprised by that. Audrey Young's, I think she's the best political correspondent in the country. And I'm quite surprised that she's kicked off her story in that fashion. It seems really, at the least, it's sloppy.
Yeah, because let's be honest, most people don't read full articles. They read the first paragraph and then decide whether or not they want to carry on. And if you've just only read that, you think, oh, right, so we're going to get rid of it. What's next? What should we choose?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem, is what next? Is none of what's next is any better. There may be the odd problem with MMP, depending on your perception, but the referendum isn't going to fix any of those. It's either get rid of it or keep it.
Because do you think one of the options on the table will be to tweak it, or will they just leave that out completely?
No, it's very hard to build that kind of thing into a referendum. The questions have to be pretty simple and binary, and that's what it's going to be. The first referendum in 2011 will be, keep it or ditch it.
Because surely, given the choice, people would want to see things tweaked, perhaps.
Yes, exactly.
Well, how can we get that through?
Yeah, well, you can't via the referendum, basically. There are other discussions ongoing on potential, changes to the way MMP works. I mean, the one that keeps coming up is the last election. I haven't got the figures in front of me, but it's not quite twice. But New Zealand First got appreciably more votes than the ACT Party did, and got no MPs, whereas ACT got 4.
And that's where the problem lies.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. But exactly how you deal with that? I mean, if you're on public address at the moment, I knew it would be a big thread. There's a fairly furious discussion about whether it would be better to get rid of the so-called coattails provision, because ACT got its other MPs in on the basis that Rodney Hyde won a seat, which meant all their votes were counted, whereas New Zealand First failed to win a seat, so all their votes were wasted. Yeah. And it's whether you either lower or get rid of the threshold, so that if New Zealand First got 4% of the vote, they would get 4% of the MPs. Yeah. Or whether you get rid of the coattails provision and say, no, you just get what you win.
Well, it's there's positives and negatives on both sides.
Yeah, there are. That's a genuine and interesting argument, but it will not be reflected at all in the referendum.
No, because things aren't in life, they aren't as clear cut as we will have it or we won't have it.
Yeah, exactly.
How about we tweak it?
I did really enjoy the apparently serious press release from Bob McCoskrie, declaring that the proposed, although it actually looks like it won't be the question anyway, the proposed question for the referendum was confusing because if you wanted change, you had to vote no. And he apparently wasn't being ironic. I mean, this is after the smacking referendum, which had the most asked about question you could imagine. Yeah. It suggested, Graham Edgeler suggested in the discussion today that perhaps Bob was being knowingly ironic. I'm not sure if he's really that capable of that, but that